1180. Next news coming your way at 1230. Breaking news when it happens anytime. The Rush Limbaugh Show starting right now on News Radio Wham 1180.
Filling in for Rush Limbaugh, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Stein.
Yes, I know. America's anchorman promised that he would be here today, but it's treatment week and he had to take off for the treatment a little earlier than anticipated. Please hold the rotten fruit. As I said the last time I was here, no one has worked harder these last 10 months in trying to get President Trump and his second term across the finish line. And if in this ghastly, hideous post-election purgatory, Rush needs to take an extra day or two here, you should forgive him and thank him for what he's done this last 10 months. It's basically the truth that if everyone had worked half as hard as Rush did this year, we would not be in the situation we are in now. I'm glad to see that President Trump is taking Rush's advice and he's heading to Georgia to try and save these two Senate seats, not because these particular senators are diehard Trumpists or populists or rock-ribbed conservatives or anything else, but they are necessary to prevent the complete control that the Democrats will take in January if these two Senate seats go down. The Republicans need to win them both because otherwise they're within the margin of Mitt Romney. And you already sense that Mitt's fingers are just twitching and itching to reach across the aisle and start working with the Democrats for the good of the American. Oh, God, the words choked in my throat. I can't even get them out. 1-800-282-2882. We will take all your calls. Mr. Snerdley is call screening. I'd be very interested in your ideas. The president has everything on his side except time. So he would benefit from some practical advice to get this stuff before the Supreme Court, and in actual fact, the questions to get before the Supreme Court, because he's under great pressure, and I'm not even talking about Democrats here, I'm not even talking about the media here, I'm not even talking about big tech here. He's under pressure from 70% of the Republican squishes to do the decent thing, invite President-elect, oh my God, there's another office of the President-elect. You know, when I'm behind the golden EIB microphone, I'm gonna go to Staples, spend $17.85 and get a big sign to put up behind me, Office of the Substitute Host. That is about as pointless a title, Office of the President-elect. It's pointless because the media are treating him like he's already the president. And I'm not ready. You know, I watch so-called conservative television networks. I listen to so-called conservative radio shows. And I'm expected to move on to discussing whether Biden's pick for Deputy Assistant Undersecretary of the Interior is quite the person we should be looking for in that job. I'm sorry, I ain't getting out the Deputy Assistant Undersecretary of the Interior. He hasn't been elected to anything. Donald J. Trump, the previous president, as Boris Johnson called him on the BBC the other day, the previous president, Donald J. Trump was on with Maria Bartiromo on Sunday, a very interesting interview. Among other things, he referred to this guy, Krebs. Krebs is another one of these fellas nobody's ever heard of until he screws the president over. He was, I think, Deputy Assistant Undersecretary for Electoral Integrity. And he was the one who barely had the polls closed when he announced that it was the cleanest election that anyone had ever held in the history of planet Earth. And Trump fired him because it's a very odd thing to say when the election and its integrity already in dispute. Why would one of your own appointees in what's meant to be the quote-unquote Trump administration put his thumb on the scale like that? And so this guy Krebs was talking that up on, I think it was 60 Minutes on CBS last night. So, oh, the greatest election. We've got so much integrity. Other countries look at us and envy us for the integrity of this election we've just held. And as Trump correctly pointed out, the election was a, quote, international joke. I'm an international type of person, so I agree with that. But it wasn't me who said it. It was President Trump who correctly said this was a, quote, international joke. And all the countries that the Democrats want to be like, Denmark, Sweden, all those kinds of places, none of them would do this. But we're supposed now to get with the program and pretend that this is just the normal, quote, unquote, peaceful, I'm going to do scare quotes all day today, peaceful transfer of power. Peaceful transfer of power. They're lucky it's that peaceful, because if you had this kind of transfer of power in a lot of African banana republic type places, there'd be a lot of blood in the street. Joe, actually, so far the only physical violence seems to have been mysteriously committed against Joe Biden's foot. The president tweeted, "Get well soon" to Joe Biden after he broke his foot while playing with his dog. I don't know why. The foot spends so much time in his mouth, it wasn't used to being on the ground walking around with the dog. Anyway, Mr. Biden will be wearing an orthopedic boot for weeks. And so if he is, quote, unquote, inaugurated on January 20th, he'll be the first president to take office wearing a medical boot. That's your breakthrough of the day. That's your identity politics breakthrough of the day. It's orthopedic Americans have shattered the glass ceiling. While playing with his dog, Mr. Biden jumped up in the air to catch a stick in his mouth and accidentally shattered the glass ceiling of his conservatory. So he may be wearing a head brace for his quote-unquote inauguration if the Democrats haven't invoked the 25th Amendment a minute into his inauguration speech. I'm not pretending this is a real so-called peaceful transfer of power, because it isn't. 3 days after Election Day, when it was clear that what had happened, I said this is the biggest heist, the biggest electoral heist in the Democratic era, by which I mean all around the world. Doesn't pick any nations of the G7 or the Democratic ones of the G20. You know, we used to call during the Cold War, the phrase arose as a synonym for the President of the United States, the leader of the free world. The leader of the free world, in contrast to guys like Brezhnev, who were the leaders of the unfree world, of the Soviet Union and its prison states around the world. And by contrast, the United States president was spoken of as the leader of the free world. You can't use that title now. Joe Biden is not entitled to be the leader of the free world elect, because this country has joined those unfree nations in not holding a free and fair election. And where the president sounded a little downhearted about where he's going to go with this, when he was talking with Maria yesterday, because he's had difficulty getting the issues before the courts that he needs to get before the courts. Mr. Snerdley we were just talking before we went on air, and he was talking about this word baseless, one of these words that's come into fashion, baseless. The president's claims of fraud are baseless. And suddenly everywhere you go, people are saying baseless this, baseless that. One reason they're baseless is because America's news networks and newspapers never actually look at the charges that are made. There's this wacky thing going on in Georgia right now where some judge, he ordered that the Dominion voting machines be impounded and protected, and then he withdrew the order like an hour later, which is again weird. That's not something regular judges do in functioning court systems. He rescinded his order an hour later, and then 2 or 3 hours later, he changed his mind again, and he ordered those voting machines be held in, I think, at least 3 counties. To read an account of that in a mainstream newspaper before I went to bed last night, I had to go to the New Zealand Herald. The New Zealand Herald is called the New Zealand Herald because it's in New Zealand, which is about as far from the United States as you can go and still be on this planet, because there's no discussion of it in American newspapers. And again, it's easy to call the charges baseless when you're not even addressing them. And if you're one of these guys, I love talking to lefties on this show, love talking to liberals, love talking to progressives, whatever you want to call yourself this week. Feel free to give me a call. You got Mr. Snerdley call screening, 800-282-2882. And I would love you to actually to address some of these charges and why they're baseless. People say there's no evidence of fraud. Actually, the strongest evidence, the one that would lead, say, a functioning police department, which, as President Trump was complaining about yesterday, the FBI evidently isn't. But the best evidence that would lead a functioning police department to look into these things is the actual numbers. There's a very interesting, it's not just, we've done all this before in the days I've been here since the election, where I've talked about how there's no precedent in American election history for a president to be elected while losing every single competitive House seat. No precedent for that at all. There's no precedent for a president to be elected while losing all but one of the bellwether counties. No precedent for that at all. But when you actually look at the data, and this isn't coming from right-wing people, this is coming oftentimes from people who, if anything, are Democrat people who just happen to have an interest in data. The Trump margin of defeat is 4 data dumps in the Democrat cities of swing states. That's all it is, 4 data dumps between 1:34 a.m. and 6:31 a.m. on Wednesday morning, after the poll workers had supposedly all gone home for the night. And these are the 4 of the 7 most anomalous data dumps in the entire election. And that's why he is now the so-called president-elect. And these are ones that are not just, they're not in the 95th percentile. In other words, the 95% of more or less normal data dumps. They're not even in the 99th percentile. That is the 99% of all data dumps. These are the far outliers of the outliers. They're in the 99.7% percentile. These are the most extreme disparities in the number of votes won for Biden. For example, a batch that landed in Michigan and basically delivered him the presidency, 6:31 Wednesday morning, 141,258 votes for Biden, 5,968 votes for Trump. That's extremely weird for reasons we'll break down. What the president needs to do, and also what you need to do if you live in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Georgia, and maybe Nevada and Arizona too, is you need to do your bit and actually help get some of this stuff before the courts. We'll talk about that and lots more straight ahead. 1-800-282-2882.
Choosing the perfect holiday gift for your loved ones can be tricky, so give them the gift that's sure to delight. Gift memberships to Rush 24/7. A full year of everything Limbaugh, podcast, plus radio show transcripts and DittoCam video, live or on demand. Order today at rushlimbaugh.com. You're listening to the EIB Network.
Rochester's